Hi, my name is Jordan Rivera. I came back from deployment believing my childhood home would be waiting for me, just like my father promised before I shipped out to Afghanistan. Or so I thought. Because while I was overseas serving my country, my own parents sold the house behind my back. They forged documents, bypassed legal requirements, and told everyone I was too unstable from combat to handle real estate decisions. But my grandfather knew them better than I did. He left something in the deed they never bothered to read. And when they realized what they'd missed, it was already too late. Before we dive in, I'm curious. What time are you watching this? And where are you from? Drop a comment below because this story might hit closer to home than you think. I never expected to come back from war to fight another battle in my own family. The plane touched down at San Antonio International on a Tuesday morning in March. 15 months overseas, and all I wanted was to sleep in my own bed, eat my mom's enchiladas, and pretend the nightmares wouldn't follow me home. I'd been texting with my parents throughout my deployment, and Dad kept reassuring me that the house was exactly as I'd left it. "Your room's untouched, mija," he'd say during our video calls. "Everything's waiting for you." I should have known. Something was wrong when neither of them picked me up at the airport. Mom claimed she had a doctor's appointment she couldn't reschedule, and Dad said he was dealing with some family business that couldn't wait. I took a cab instead, watching familiar neighborhoods blur past through bulletproof taxi windows. Even the ride home felt different. The driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, probably wondering why I looked so tense. Combat does that to you. Makes you scan every corner, every shadow, even when you're supposedly safe. The house sat on Magnolia Street, same as always. White stucco walls, red tile roof, the massive oak tree I used to climb as a kid. But something felt off the moment I stepped out of the cab. The lawn was too perfect, like someone had hired a landscaping service. Mom always kept a small vegetable garden by the side fence, but now there were decorative rocks and some kind of ornamental grass that definitely wasn't there when I left. I paid the driver and walked up the front steps, my duffel bag heavy on my shoulder. The brass numbers on the house still read 4127, but they looked freshly polished. I reached for my keys, the same ones I'd carried through 3 different countries, and slid them into the lock. Nothing happened. I tried again, jiggling the key the way I always had to with this stubborn old door. Still, nothing. That's when I noticed the lockbox hanging from the front door handle, one of those realtor lockboxes with a digital keypad. My stomach dropped. I pulled out my phone and called Mom. "Jordan, honey, you're home," she answered, but her voice sounded strained, like she was trying too hard to sound normal. "Mom, why won't my key work? And why is there a realtor's lockbox on the front door?" Silence stretched between us for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she sighed. "We need to talk. Your father and I are at your Tia Carmen's house. Can you meet us there?" "What's going on with the house, Mom? Just come to Carmen's. We'll explain everything." She hung up before I could ask any more questions. I stood there on the front porch, still in my desert boots and camouflage jacket, feeling more displaced than I had during my entire deployment. At least in Afghanistan, I knew what the mission was. Here, I was completely lost. Tia Carmen lived about 10 minutes away in a smaller house near the elementary school where I'd spent kindergarten through 5th grade. When I knocked on her door, she opened it with tears in her eyes and pulled me into a hug that smelled like vanilla and sadness. "Mija, I'm so sorry," she whispered in my ear. "I told them not to do this while you were gone." That's when I knew, for certain, that something terrible had happened. My parents sat at Carmen's kitchen table like defendants waiting for a verdict. Dad wouldn't make eye contact, just stared at his hands folded in front of him. Mom had that look she always got when she was about to deliver bad news, lips pressed tight, shoulders squared like she was bracing for impact. "Sit down, Jordan," Mom said, gesturing to the empty chair across from them. I remained standing. "Tell me what happened to the house." Dad finally looked up. We had to sell it, mija. The medical bills, the property taxes, your mother's surgery last year. We were drowning in debt. What medical bills? What surgery? You never told me Mom was sick. We didn't want to worry you while you were deployed, Mom said. You had enough stress dealing with everything over there. I felt anger rising in my chest, the same kind of rage that had gotten me in trouble during my first year of service, before I learned to control it. So you decided to sell my childhood home without even telling me? It wasn't your house, Jordan, Dad said quietly. It was in our names. We bought it before you were born. But you always said it would be mine, someday. You promised. Mom's voice got defensive. Plans change. And honestly, we weren't sure you'd even want it after what you've been through. The doctors said combat veterans sometimes have trouble adjusting to civilian life, making major decisions. Don't. I cut her off. Don't you dare use my service as an excuse for this. Carmen cleared her throat from where she'd been hovering near the stove. Jordan, there's something else you should know. The house sold 3 weeks ago, to a developer. They're planning to tear it down and build condominiums. The room spun around me. Not only had my parents sold the house I'd grown up in, but it was going to be demolished. Every memory, every corner where I'd hidden during thunderstorms, every mark on the doorframe where they'd measured my height, all of it would be gone. Who bought it? I asked. Some investment company, Dad said. Rivera Development Group. They made an offer we couldn't refuse. Something about that name struck me as familiar, but I couldn't place it. My head was still spinning from jet lag and shock. Where are you two living now? We found a nice apartment near the medical center, Mom said. It's smaller but easier to maintain, and the rent is reasonable. I looked around Carmen's small kitchen, taking in the religious candles on the windowsill, the family photos covering every available surface, the smell of coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. This wasn't how I'd imagined my homecoming. I'd pictured sleeping in my old bed, maybe crying a little bit from relief at being safe. Instead, I felt more lost than I had during the worst firefight of my deployment. I need some air, I said, heading toward the back door. Carmen's backyard was tiny but well-maintained, with a small garden and a wooden bench under a mesquite tree. I sat down and pulled out my phone, scrolling through the photos I'd saved from my last leave. There was the house, exactly as I remembered it. Me and my parents standing on the front porch, all of us smiling. Dad had his arm around my shoulders, and Mom was holding up a sign that said, "Welcome home soon, Jordan." The date stamp showed it was from just 8 months ago. I felt like I was looking at pictures of strangers. That's when I remembered something. My grandfather had told me before he died, back when I was in high school. He'd pulled me aside at a family barbecue and said, "Jordan, never trust anyone with your future, not even family. People change when money gets involved." At the time, I'd thought he was being cynical. Now I wondered if he'd been trying to warn me about something. I spent the next 2 days in a cheap motel near the highway, trying to process what had happened while my parents kept calling with invitations to family dinners and coffee dates, acting like nothing catastrophic had occurred. Each time Mom's name appeared on my phone screen, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the same feeling I'd get right before an IED sweep in Kandahar. Hypervigilance, the military counselors called it. Your body preparing for danger even when your mind hadn't caught up yet. On Thursday morning, I decided I needed to see the house one more time before the developers tore it down. I drove my rental car slowly down Magnolia Street, taking in details I'd missed during that first shocking encounter. The mailbox had been repainted a generic black instead of the cheerful blue Mom had chosen years ago. The garden gate hung slightly crooked, like someone had been careless moving furniture through it. Even the address numbers looked different, newer, more modern, completely impersonal. I parked across the street and just sat there for a while, engine off, watching the house like it might reveal some secret if I stared long enough. That's when I noticed the moving truck parked in the driveway. Two men in work clothes were loading furniture onto the truck. Furniture I recognized. My heart started pounding as I watched them carry out the dining room table where I'd done countless homework assignments. Then came the rocking chair from the living room, the one Mom used to sit in when she was pregnant with me, according to family legend. They were loading my childhood onto a truck like it was just another estate sale. I got out of the car and walked across the street, my military training kicking in automatically. Assess the situation, identify potential threats, gather intelligence. The movers looked up when they saw me approaching, probably wondering if I was another neighbor complaining about the truck blocking traffic. "Excuse me," I called out to the older of the two men. "What's happening with the furniture?" He wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "Moving sale. Family said they needed everything out by Friday." "What family?" "The Riveras. Nice people. Said their daughter was in the military, couldn't make it back for the move." My stomach turned. They'd told the movers I couldn't make it back. Not that I wasn't informed, not that there had been a miscommunication. They'd created a story where I was simply unavailable, like I was off on some extended vacation instead of serving overseas. "Where is everything going?" "Storage unit across town. Here's the card if you need it." He handed me a business card for Martinez Family Storage. Unit 47B. They paid for 6 months up front. I thanked him and walked back to my car, but instead of leaving, I drove around the block and parked where I could still see the house. Something wasn't adding up. If my parents were so broke they had to sell the house, how could they afford 6 months of storage fees? And why put everything in storage instead of selling it or moving it to their new apartment? I pulled out my phone and called the storage facility. "Martinez Storage, this is Elena speaking." "Hi, I'm calling about Unit 47B. I think my parents may have rented it recently." "Let me check. What's the last name?" "Rivera." "Yes, here it is. Rafael and Maria Rivera. They rented it last month. Are you Jordan?" "Yes, that's me." "Oh, good. Your father left a note that you might call. He said if you wanted access to the unit, we should add you to the authorized list. Do you want me to do that now?" I almost dropped the phone. They'd anticipated that I might want access to our family belongings. That suggested a level of planning that contradicted their story about sudden financial crisis and hasty decisions. "Yes, please add me to the list. I'll need to verify your identity when you come in. Can you bring a driver's license and some kind of proof that you're related to the primary renters? I have my military ID. Will that work?" "Perfect. We're open until 8 tonight if you want to come by." After hanging up, I sat in the car trying to piece together what I knew. My parents had sold the house to pay for medical bills, but they'd never told me Mom was sick. They'd put all the furniture in storage but claimed they were moving to a smaller apartment. They'd told the movers I couldn't make it back, but they'd also left instructions for me to access the storage unit. None of it made sense. I decided to drive by their new apartment before going to the storage facility. Dad had given me the address during our conversation at Tia Carmen's house, Sunset Manor Apartments on the south side of town. It was a decent complex, not the kind of place people would live if they were truly struggling financially. The parking lot was full of newer cars, and the buildings looked recently renovated. I found their apartment number and knocked. No answer. I tried calling both their phones, but they went straight to voicemail. Either they were avoiding me, or they weren't home. I walked around to the back of the building, where some apartments had small patios. Through a sliding glass door, I could see into what looked like their living room. It was furnished, but not with anything I recognized from our house. Everything looked new. A modern couch, a glass coffee table, a flat-screen TV that was definitely bigger than the old one from Magnolia Street. The sight of their new, unfamiliar furniture hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just that they'd sold the house. They'd completely started over, like our old life together had never existed. I felt like a ghost haunting places where I used to belong. I drove to Martinez Storage feeling increasingly disconnected from reality. The facility was one of those big warehouse complexes surrounded by chain-link fencing. Elena at the front desk was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a ponytail. She checked my military ID against her computer, records, and handed me a key. "Your dad seemed really emotional when he rented the unit," she said conversationally. "Keep talking about how much he'd miss having all your family things around. Said it was the hardest decision he'd ever made." That didn't match the matter-of-fact way he'd explained the sale to me. I thanked Elena and walked down the long corridor of storage units, counting numbers until I reached 47B. The metal roll-up door was secured with a padlock, but my key fit perfectly. When I lifted the door, the smell hit me immediately. Furniture polish, old books, and something else I couldn't identify. Mom's perfume, maybe, or the lavender sachets she used to keep in the linen closet. The unit was packed floor to ceiling with everything from our house, arranged carefully like someone had tried to recreate the rooms in miniature. Our dining room set was pushed against one wall. The living room furniture was grouped together in the center. Boxes labeled Jordan's room were stacked near the entrance. I opened one of the boxes labeled with my name. Inside were things from my childhood bedroom, photo albums, high school trophies, stuffed animals I'd forgotten I owned, but also things that seemed random: kitchen utensils, bathroom towels, even the throw pillows from the couch. Someone had packed these boxes quickly, without much organization. At the bottom of the first box, I found something that made me freeze. It was a manila envelope with my name written on it in my grandfather's handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 2 weeks before he died 3 years ago. "Jordan," it began, "if you're reading this, then something has happened that required you to search through family belongings. I'm leaving this with your parents, but I suspect they may not give it to you directly. There are things about our family finances that you should know, and documents that legally belong to you. Check the deed to the house. Check it carefully. Your name has been on it since your 18th birthday, but your parents never told you. I made sure of that after I saw how they handled your college fund. Love, Abuelo." My hands shook as I read the letter twice, then a third time. My name had been on the deed since I was 18? That was 7 years ago. If that were true, then my parents couldn't have legally sold the house without my signature. I rifled through more boxes, looking for any official documents. In a box labeled Important Papers, I found bank statements, insurance policies, and tax records. At the very bottom, in a folder marked House Stuff, was a copy of the property deed. There it was, in black and white. Jordan Elena Rivera and Rafael Rivera and Maria Santos Rivera, as joint tenants with right of survivorship. My name was first, on the deed. I'd been a legal owner of the house for 7 years without knowing it. The storage unit suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. I sat down on a box and tried to process what this meant. Either my parents had committed fraud by selling property that partly belonged to me, or there was something else going on that I didn't understand yet. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of every page of the deed, then carefully put everything back where I'd found it. I needed legal advice, and I needed it fast. I left the storage facility with my grandfather's letter clutched in my hand and a dozen questions racing through my mind. The afternoon sun felt too bright, like everything had been overexposed, and I found myself checking my rearview mirror constantly during the drive back to my motel. Old habits from convoy duty. Always watch for followers. Always have an escape route planned. The motel room smelled like industrial disinfectant and stale cigarettes. I spread the deed copies across the narrow desk and read every line 3 more times, looking for some loophole or explanation that would make sense of what my parents had done. But there it was, clear as day. My signature would have been required for any sale. Without it, the transaction was illegal. I called the number on the deed for the title company that had handled the original paperwork. After being transferred, twice, I reached a woman named Patricia who sounded like she'd been working in real estate since before I was born. "I'm calling about a property deed from 2016, I said. "I need to verify some information about ownership transfer. I'll need the property address and the names on the deed." I gave her the information, and I could hear her typing in the background. "Yes, here it is. 427 Magnolia Street. Joint tenancy between 3 parties, Jordan Rivera, Rafael Rivera, and Maria Rivera. What specifically did you need to know? If this property were to be sold, would all 3 owners need to sign the sale documents?" "Absolutely. With joint tenancy, all parties must consent to any transfer of ownership. That's pretty standard." My mouth went dry. What would happen if the property was sold without one owner's signature? That would be fraudulent conveyance. The sale wouldn't be legally valid, and the missing owner could file to void the transaction. Is there a problem with this property? "I'm not sure yet. Thank you for your help." I hung up and stared at the motel room ceiling, trying to figure out my next move. Part of me wanted to confront my parents immediately, but my military training had taught me the importance of gathering intelligence before engaging the enemy. And right now, that's what my parents felt like, the enemy. I drove to the public library, partly because I needed internet access that wasn't the motel's spotty Wi-Fi, but mostly because libraries had always been my safe space. Even as a kid, when Mom and Dad were fighting about money or work stress, I could disappear into the stacks and lose myself in other people's stories. The librarian on duty was a young guy with sleeve tattoos who looked up from his computer when I approached the reference desk. "I need to research property records," I told him, specifically recent sales transactions. "County clerk's office has all that online now. I can show you how to access it." He led me to a computer terminal and walked me through the database. Within minutes, I was looking at the official record of my childhood home's sale. Rivera Development Group had purchased it for $340,000 3 weeks ago. The sale documents showed signatures from Rafael Rivera and Maria Rivera, plus a notarized signature that was supposed to be mine. I stared at that signature for a long time. It looked convincingly like my handwriting. Same slant, same pressure. Even the little flourish I always added to the R in Rivera. But I'd been in Afghanistan when this document was supposedly signed. I had my deployment records to prove it. "Find what you were looking for?" the librarian asked, appearing behind me. "More than I wanted to," I muttered. I printed out everything I could find about the sale, then started researching Rivera Development Group. The company had been incorporated just 6 months ago, with Rafael Rivera listed as the managing partner and Maria Rivera as secretary-treasurer. My parents hadn't just sold the house. They'd created a fake company to buy it from themselves. The pieces were starting to fit together in a way that made me feel sick. This wasn't a desperate decision driven by medical bills. This was a planned scheme to steal my inheritance while I was deployed and couldn't stop them. I needed more evidence before I could do anything about it. I called my old boss from the auto parts store where I'd worked before enlisting, Miguel Santos, who also happened to be a notary public. "Jordan, I heard you were back from overseas. How are you doing, mija?" "I'm okay, Miguel. Listen, I need a favor. Can you look up a notarization for me? I think someone might have forged my signature." "That's serious business. What's the document?" I gave him the details from the property sale. I could hear him typing, then a long pause. "Jordan, this shows you signed this document in my office on March 15th. But I remember that day clearly because it was my daughter's birthday. The woman who came in looked nothing like you. Older, heavier, with blonde hair. She had an ID that said Jordan Rivera, but I should have looked more carefully. Do you remember anything else about her?" She was nervous, kept checking her phone, and she was with a man who stayed in the car. I could see him through the window. Looked like he might be her husband. My heart was pounding. "Miguel, would you be willing to make a statement about this? Maybe talk to a lawyer?" "If someone stole your identity, absolutely. That's fraud, Jordan. Someone could go to jail for this." After hanging up with Miguel, I sat in the library parking lot trying to decide what to do next. I needed a lawyer, but I also needed to know more about Rivera Development Group and what my parents were planning to do with the property. I drove to the address listed for Rivera Development Group, which turned out to be a small office in a strip mall between a tax preparation service and a nail salon. The windows were tinted and there was no company sign visible from the street. I parked across the parking lot and waited. After about an hour, I saw Dad's truck pull up. He got out and unlocked the office door, then went inside. A few minutes later, a woman I didn't recognize arrived in a silver sedan. She was maybe 45, professionally dressed, carrying a briefcase. They were inside for about 20 minutes before both coming out together. Dad locked up, and they shook hands before getting in their separate vehicles. I followed the woman's car, keeping enough distance that she wouldn't notice me, but close enough that I wouldn't lose her in traffic. She drove to an upscale neighborhood, about 15 minutes away, and pulled into the driveway of a large house with a for sale sign in the front yard. I parked down the street and walked past the house, pretending to be out for exercise. The realtor sign read, Carmen Valdez, Luxury. Home Specialist. I took a picture of her contact information with my phone. When I got back to my car, I called the number on the sign. Carmen Valdez Real Estate. This is Carmen. Hi, I'm interested in the property development opportunities in the Magnolia Street area. I heard Rivera Development Group is doing some interesting projects there. Oh yes, they're planning a beautiful condominium complex. Very exciting project. Are you looking to invest? Possibly. How many units are they planning? 12 luxury condos, starting in the mid-400s. The location is perfect. Close to downtown, but quiet neighborhood feel. Would you like me to send you some information? I gave her my email address and hung up feeling dizzy. My parents weren't just stealing my inheritance. They were planning to make a fortune doing it. 12 condos starting at $400,000 each. That was nearly $5 million in total sales, minus construction costs. Back at the motel, I opened my laptop and found an email from Carmen with glossy renderings of the proposed development. The architectural drawings showed the exact footprint of my childhood home, but instead of our modest 3-bedroom house, there were sleek modern condominiums with names like the Rivera and Magnolia Manor. At the bottom of the email was a note. Groundbreaking is scheduled for next month. All pre-construction sales are being handled exclusively through Rivera Development Group. Next month. They were planning to tear down my house in less than 4 weeks. I called Tia Carmen, the only family member I trusted at this point. Jordan, how are you holding up? Carmen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you know I was part owner of the house? Long silence. Then, your grandfather told me, but he made me promise not to tell your parents that I knew. He was worried about what they might do. What did he think they might do? He said your father had always been jealous of the attention you got, especially after you joined the military. And your mother. She never got over the fact that he left part of his money to set up your ownership instead of giving it all to them. Grandfather left money to put my name on the deed? $20,000. He said it was your inheritance, and he wanted to make sure you got it even if something happened to him. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My grandfather had used his own money to secure my future, and my parents had stolen it from me while I was serving my country. Carmen, I need a lawyer. Do you know anyone who handles this kind of case? My neighbor's daughter is an attorney, Elena Martinez. She specializes in family law and fraud cases. I can call her if you want. Please do. And Carmen? Don't tell my parents we talked. Of course not, mija. But Jordan, be careful. When people steal this much money, they don't stop easily. Elena. Martinez agreed to meet me the next morning at her office downtown. I spent the night at the motel going through everything I'd collected. The deed copies, the fraudulent sale documents, Miguel's contact information, and my grandfather's letter. I arranged everything in chronological order, the way we'd been taught to organize intelligence reports in the military. Facts first, speculation second, conclusions last. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my parents' faces at Carmen's kitchen table, the way they'd looked so prepared for my questions, so ready with their explanations about medical bills and financial hardship. They'd rehearsed their story while I was getting shot at in Afghanistan. Elena's office was in a converted Victorian house near the courthouse. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with short dark hair and the kind of direct eye contact that made me think she didn't lose cases very often. Her handshake was firm, confident. "Carmen told me a little about your situation," she said, gesturing for me to sit in the chair across from her desk. "Why don't you walk me through what happened from the beginning?" I told her everything, starting with my homecoming and ending with my discovery about Rivera Development Group. She took notes on a legal pad, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just listening. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and studied her notes. "This is textbook fraud," she said finally. "Identity theft, forgery, fraudulent conveyance. The fact that they created a shell company to buy the property makes it conspiracy as, well, we're looking at multiple felonies here. What can we do about it?" Several things. First, we file an emergency motion to void the sale based on fraudulent conveyance. Since your signature was forged, the sale is legally invalid. Second, we get an injunction to stop any development on the property. Third, we file criminal complaints for fraud and identity theft. I felt a surge of relief mixed with anxiety. How long will all that take? The emergency motion could be heard within days if we can show immediate threat of irreparable harm. The criminal case will take longer, but the civil remedies should be faster. "There's something else," I said, pulling out my phone. "I think my parents are planning to disappear once they get the development money." Elena raised an eyebrow. "What makes you think that?" "They put all our family belongings in storage, told everyone I couldn't make it back for the move, and they're living in a furnished apartment. Plus, they scheduled groundbreaking for next month. That timing feels deliberate. Get the construction started, collect the pre-sales money, then vanish. We need to move quickly then. Can you get me copies of your deployment records? We'll need to prove you were overseas when the signature was supposedly notarized. I can have them by this afternoon." Elena stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the courthouse across the street. "Jordan, I have to ask, are you prepared for this to get ugly? When we file these motions, your parents are going to know you're fighting back. Family. Fraud cases can get very nasty. They stole my inheritance while I was serving my country. How much uglier can it get?" She turned back to me with a slight smile. "You'd be surprised. But I like your attitude. Let's get started." I spent the rest of the morning at the Veterans Affairs office, getting certified copies of my deployment records. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with a Texas flag pin on her jacket, looked sympathetic when I explained what I needed the documents for. "Family troubles?" she asked quietly. "You could say that. Happens more than you'd think, honey. People see that military pay and think it's easy money. Forget about the sacrifice behind it." She expedited my request, and I had everything Elena needed within 2 hours. On my way back to her office, my phone rang. Mom's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. But I needed to know what they were thinking, whether they suspected I'd figured out their scheme. "Hi, Mom. Jordan, where have you been? We've been trying to reach you for days. I made your favorite dinner last night, carne guisada with extra potatoes." Her voice sounded normal, cheerful, even like we were just a regular family making weekend plans. "I've been busy, Mom, trying to figure out my next steps. Well, your father and I were thinking you might want to come apartment hunting with us this weekend. We found some nice places near the university. Perfect for a young veteran starting over." Starting over. The phrase hit me wrong. "What about the house, Mom? I've been thinking about what you said, about the medical bills and everything." What about it? It's sold, Mija. Time to move forward. I was just wondering, when exactly did you decide to sell? It seems like it happened pretty fast. A pause. Well, these things do happen quickly in real estate. When the right buyer comes along, you have to act fast. And Rivera Development Group was the right buyer? Another pause, longer this time. They made a fair offer. Your father handled most of the details. I'd like to see the paperwork sometime, just to understand what happened. Jordan, why are you asking so many questions? The house is gone. We're all moving on. You should too. There it was, the edge in her voice that I remembered from childhood arguments. The tone that meant the conversation was over whether I wanted it to be or not. I'm just trying to understand, Mom. It's my childhood home. I think I have a right to know what happened. You have a right to trust your parents. We did what was best for the family. She hung up before I could respond. I sat in my rental car, outside the VA office, staring at my phone. They were still maintaining the fiction that this was a legitimate family decision made in everyone's best interest. But Mom's defensiveness told me she was worried about something. I drove back to Elena's office and handed her the deployment records. She reviewed them quickly, then made copies for her files. Perfect. These show you were in Afghanistan from January through March of this year. The fraudulent signature is dated March 15th. There's no way you could have been in Miguel Santos's office that day. What's our next move? I'm filing the emergency motion this afternoon. We should get a hearing date within the week. In the meantime, I want you to avoid contact with your parents. Don't answer their calls. Don't meet with them. Don't give them any information about what we're doing. They're going to figure out something's wrong when they get served with legal papers. Let them. The element of surprise is the only advantage we have right now. Once they know we're onto their scheme, they'll either try to cover their tracks or accelerate their timeline. Elena walked me to the door of her office. Jordan, one more thing. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? If your parents realize you're threatening their multi-million-dollar development deal, they might try to intimidate you into backing down. I thought about the cheap motel room with its broken air conditioner and cigarette-stained walls. I'll figure something out. Stay with Carmen if you can. And if your parents contact you, don't engage. Just refer them to me. As I drove away from Elena's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced since coming home. Hope. For the first time in days, I had a plan and someone who believed me. But I also felt the familiar weight of preparing for battle. In Afghanistan, the hardest part was never the firefight itself. It was knowing the firefight was coming and waiting for it to start. I called Carmen and asked if I could stay in her guest room for a few days. She agreed immediately, no questions asked. When I arrived at her house that evening with my duffel bag, she had already made up the bed and left clean towels on the dresser. "Your parents called me today," she said as we ate dinner at her small kitchen table. "They wanted to know if I'd seen you. What did you tell them?" "That you were dealing with readjustment issues and needed some space." "I didn't lie. You are dealing with readjustment issues, just not the kind they think." After dinner, I helped Carmen wash dishes while she told me stories about my grandfather that I'd never heard before. How he'd worked 2 jobs to buy the house on Magnolia Street. How proud he'd been when I enlisted, even though he worried about me constantly. How he'd spent his last months making sure I'd be taken care of after he was gone. "He knew what your parents were like," Carmen said, drying a plate carefully. "He loved them, but he didn't trust them with money. That's why he put your name on the deed without telling them." "I wish he'd told me. He thought there would be time. He didn't expect the cancer to move so fast." That night, lying in Carmen's guest bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about my grandfather's hands. Strong, calloused from years of construction work, always gentle when he helped me with homework or taught me to change a tire. He'd built something for me to inherit. Not just a house, but security, stability, a foundation for whatever life I chose to build. My parents had tried to steal that from me while I was thousands of miles away, risking my life for people who didn't even know my name. But tomorrow, the fight would begin. And this time, I wouldn't be the one caught off guard. The court hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning, 3 days after Elena filed our emergency motion. I spent those days in a strange state of suspended animation at Carmen's house, avoiding phone calls from my parents and trying not to think about what would happen if we lost. Carmen kept me busy with small projects around her house, fixing her leaky kitchen faucet, organizing her garage, anything to keep my hands occupied while my mind raced. On Wednesday evening, Elena called with an update that made my stomach drop. "Your parents hired a lawyer," she said. "Marcus Webb from Webb & Associates. He's expensive and he specializes in real estate fraud defense." "That's bad, isn't it?" "It means they're taking this seriously." He filed a response claiming the signature on the sale documents is legitimate and that you're suffering from PTSD-related delusions. He's also requesting a psychological evaluation. I felt the familiar anger rising in my chest, the same rage that had gotten me in trouble during basic training. They're going to claim I'm crazy? It's a standard defense in family fraud cases. The idea is to make you look unstable and unreliable as a witness. But Jordan, we have the deployment records and Miguel's testimony. The facts are on our side. What? About Rivera Development Group? Did they respond to the injunction? That's the interesting part. Webb claims Rivera Development is a legitimate company and that any similarity to your parents' names is coincidental. He's provided incorporation documents showing different people as the officers. That's impossible. I saw Dad at their office. Which is why I need you to go back there tomorrow morning before the hearing. Take pictures, document everything you can. If they're using fake officers for the corporation, that's another layer of fraud we can expose. After hanging up with Elena, I sat on Carmen's back porch and tried to process what I was feeling. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was betrayal so deep it felt like grief. My parents weren't just stealing from me. They were trying to destroy my credibility, my reputation, my mental health. They were willing to claim their own daughter was delusional rather than admit what they'd done. Carmen found me there an hour later, staring at the stars and thinking about the last conversation I'd had with my grandfather before deploying. "You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders," she said, settling into the chair beside me. "Elena says they're going to claim I have PTSD, that I'm making all this up." Carmen was quiet for a moment. "Do you have PTSD?" "Probably. Most of us do, to some degree. But that doesn't mean I'm hallucinating forged documents and fake companies. Your parents know that claiming mental illness will hurt you more than losing the house would." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "Jordan, you've always been proud of your strength, your ability to handle whatever life threw at you. They're attacking the thing you value most about yourself, your competence, your reliability. That's not legal strategy. That's cruelty." She was right. The house was important. But what my parents were doing felt like they were trying to erase me entirely. If I was crazy, delusional, unstable, then nothing I said mattered. I could be dismissed, ignored, written off as a damaged veteran who couldn't handle reality. "I won't let them do that," I said quietly. "I know you won't. But be prepared. Tomorrow is going to be hard." Thursday morning, I drove to the Rivera Development Group office at 7 a.m., an hour before most businesses opened. The parking lot was empty except for a maintenance truck servicing the nail salon. I parked across the street and waited. At 8:30, Dad's truck pulled up. But instead of getting out immediately, he sat in the cab talking on his phone for several minutes. I used my phone to zoom in and take pictures through his windshield. Even from across the parking lot, I could see the stress on his face. This wasn't the confident man who'd explained the house sale to me at Carmen's kitchen table. A few minutes later, the same woman I'd followed before arrived in her silver sedan. But this time, she wasn't alone. A younger man in a suit got out of the passenger side, someone I'd never seen before. All three of them went into the office together. I waited until they were inside, then walked across the parking lot and tried to peer through the tinted windows. I couldn't see much, but I could hear raised voices. Someone was arguing, though I couldn't make out the words. I walked around to the back of the building, where there was a small employee parking area. That's when I saw something that stopped me cold. Mom's car was parked behind the building, hidden from street view. She was supposed to be at home, probably getting ready to play the concerned mother in court later that morning. I took pictures of her license plate and the building, then walked back to my car. As I was driving away, I saw all four of them come out of the office together. Dad and the unknown man got in Dad's truck, while Mom and the woman got in the silver sedan. They drove off in different directions, like they were trying not to be seen together. The courthouse was the imposing limestone building that had been built in the 1920s. I met Elena in the lobby at 9:30, and she immediately noticed my expression. What happened at the development office? I told her about seeing all four people together, including Mom's hidden car. Elena took notes as I talked, occasionally asking for clarification. "This is good," she said when I finished. "It shows ongoing coordination between your parents and their supposed business partners. We can use this to challenge their claim that Rivera Development is independent. Will it be enough? We'll find out. Remember, in an emergency hearing like this, we just need to show probable cause that fraud occurred. We don't have to prove everything beyond a reasonable doubt." The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with maybe 20 rows of wooden benches and tall windows that let in morning sunlight. Judge Patricia Huang took the bench at exactly 10 a.m., and I was struck by how young she looked. Probably not. Much older than me. Elena and I sat at the plaintiff's table on the left side of the courtroom. Across the aisle, Marcus Webb sat with my parents and two other people I didn't recognize, presumably the fake officers of Rivera Development Group. When I saw my parents, my chest tightened. Mom was dressed in her Sunday best, the navy blue, dress she wore to important occasions, and she looked smaller somehow, more fragile than I remembered. Dad wore his only suit, the one he'd bought for my high school graduation, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Your Honor," Elena began when called upon, "we're here today because the defendants committed multiple felonies in order to steal my client's inheritance. They forged her signature while she was deployed overseas, created a fraudulent corporation, and are attempting to develop property that was obtained through illegal means." She presented our evidence methodically. The deployment records proving I was in Afghanistan, Miguel's notarization records showing someone else had used my identity, the deed showing my ownership, and the timeline of Rivera Development Group's incorporation. When Marcus Webb stood to respond, his voice was smooth and condescending. "Your Honor, this case is a tragedy, but not the kind of tragedy my colleague would have you believe. Jordan Rivera is a combat veteran who has returned home to find that her childhood has ended. The house has been sold, her parents have moved on, and she's having difficulty accepting these changes. Rather than dealing with her trauma in a healthy way, she's constructed an elaborate conspiracy theory that allows her to avoid facing reality." He gestured toward my parents. "Rafael and Maria Rivera are hardworking people who found themselves in financial crisis due to medical expenses. They made the difficult decision to sell their family home, and they're being persecuted by their own daughter for making a choice she doesn't like. I wanted to stand up and scream that he was lying, that I had proof of everything. But Elena had coached me to stay calm, to let the evidence speak for itself." Webb continued for another 10 minutes, painting me as an unstable veteran who couldn't distinguish between reality and paranoid fantasies. He claimed the signature on the sale documents was legitimate, that Rivera Development Group was a separate entity, and that my deployment records were irrelevant because I could have signed the papers before leaving for Afghanistan. When he finished, Judge Huang looked at both lawyers. "I'll hear from the plaintiff's witness now." Miguel Santos took the stand and told his story simply and clearly. He identified the woman who had come to his office with fake identification, described how nervous she'd seemed, and confirmed that she looked nothing like me. Under cross-examination, Webb tried to suggest that Miguel was confused about dates or had been coached by Elena, but Miguel didn't waver. "I remember that day because it was my daughter's birthday," he repeated. The woman who came in was not Jordan Rivera. After Miguel stepped down, Judge Huang reviewed the documents Elena had submitted. The courtroom was quiet except for the sound of pages turning and the old building settling around us. Finally, she looked up. "Based on the evidence presented, I find probable cause that fraudulent conveyance has occurred. The emergency motion for preliminary injunction is granted. All development activity on the property at 4127 Magnolia Street is suspended pending full resolution of this matter." I felt Elena squeeze my arm under the table, but I couldn't quite process what had happened. We'd won the first round. But as we left the courtroom, I saw the look my parents exchanged with their lawyer. This wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. The victory in court felt hollow by that evening. Elena had warned me that a preliminary injunction was just the first step, but I'd hoped winning would bring some sense of relief. Instead, I felt like I was standing in the eye of a hurricane, knowing the worst was still coming. Carmen made celebratory tamales for dinner, but I could barely eat. My phone had been buzzing all afternoon with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Elena had told me not to answer any of them, but the constant ringing was making me jumpy. Finally, I turned the phone off and helped Carmen clean the kitchen, grateful for the familiar routine of washing dishes and putting things away. "You did good today, mija," Carmen said as we finished drying the last pot. "Your grandfather would be proud." "It doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like I just declared war on my own family." "They declared war on you first, while you were serving your country, no less. You're just fighting back." Around 9 p.m., someone knocked on Carmen's front door. We looked at each other, both, thinking the same thing. My parents had found me. Carmen peered through the peephole and frowned. "It's a woman I don't recognize. Young, professional-looking." I joined her at the window and saw a Hispanic woman in her 20s standing on the porch, holding what looked like a manila envelope. She didn't look threatening, but after everything that had happened, I wasn't taking any chances. "Can I help?" "You?" Carmen called through the door. "I'm looking for Jordan Rivera. I have some information she needs to see." Carmen and I exchanged glances. It could be a trap, but it could also be someone with evidence that would help our case. I decided to crack the door open, keeping the chain lock engaged. "I'm Jordan." "Who? Are you?" "My name is Sophia Reyes. I work at First National Bank. I processed some of the paperwork for Rivera Development Group, and after I heard about the court case today, I thought you should know what I saw." I studied her face. She looked nervous but sincere, like someone who'd been wrestling with a difficult decision. I unlocked the chain and opened the door. "Come in. But I should tell you, my lawyer advised me not to talk to anyone about the case." "I understand. But what I have to show you? It's not about the case directly. It's about what your parents are planning to do next." We sat in Carmen's living room, and Sophia opened the envelope she'd been carrying. Inside were photocopies of bank documents, account applications, wire transfer requests, and something that made my blood run cold. 3 days ago, your father opened a business account for Rivera Development Group, Sophia said. But look at the signature card. She handed me a copy of the account application. Rafael Rivera had signed as president of the company, but there was a second signature I recognized immediately. It was supposed to be mine, giving me signing authority on the account. But I'd never been to First National Bank in my life. "They forged my signature again," I said, showing the document to Carmen. "That's not the worst part," Sophia continued. "Yesterday, they submitted a wire transfer request to move money to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The amount was $2.3 million. From where? The account was just opened. From pre-sales on the condominium development. Apparently, they'd been collecting deposits from buyers even before they broke ground. The wire transfer is scheduled to process tomorrow morning. I felt like the room was spinning. My parents weren't just trying to steal my inheritance. They were running a sophisticated scam that involved multiple victims. The people who'd put deposits down on condos had no idea the whole project was built on fraudulent property ownership. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked Sophia. "Because when that wire transfer processes, your parents are going to disappear, and everyone who invested in those condos is going to lose their money, including my own grandmother, who put down her entire retirement savings for a unit." Carmen reached for my hand. "Jordan, this is bigger than just your house now," I called Elena's emergency number, and she answered on the second ring. "Sophia Reyes from First National is here," I said without preamble. "My parents are planning to wire $2.3 million to the Cayman Islands tomorrow morning. They've been collecting pre-sales deposits on condos they can't legally build." "I'll be right over." Elena arrived 20 minutes later, still in her pajamas with a coat thrown over them. She listened to Sophia's story, examined the bank documents, and made several phone calls to people whose names I didn't recognize. "This changes everything," Elena said when she finished her calls. "We're not just dealing with family fraud anymore. This is wire fraud, money laundering, and investment fraud. Federal crimes." "What can we do?" "I've contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. They'll freeze the accounts first thing in the morning. But Jordan, once federal agents get involved, this becomes a criminal investigation. There's no going back from that." I thought about my parents sitting in the courtroom that morning, playing the role of confused victims while they knew they had millions of dollars ready to wire offshore. I thought about Sophia's grandmother and all the other people who'd trusted Rivera Development Group with their life savings. "Do it," I said. Elena made another phone call, this one to someone she called Agent Morrison. The conversation was brief and professional, mostly Elena reading account numbers and explaining the timeline of events. When she hung up, she looked at me seriously. "The FBI will execute search warrants tomorrow morning at your parents' apartment, the Rivera Development Office, and the bank. They'll also arrest your parents and anyone else involved in the scheme." "What about the pre-sales victims? Will they get their money back?" "Eventually, maybe. But it could take years, and there's no guarantee they'll recover everything." Sophia had been quiet during Elena's phone calls, but now she spoke up. "There's something else you should know. Your parents weren't working alone. There's a whole network of people involved in this. Real estate agents, contractors, even someone at the title company who helped falsify documents." "How do you know all this?" "Because they tried to recruit me. They offered me $50,000 to create false loan documents for some of the condo buyers. When I refused, they said I should keep my mouth shut if I knew what was good for me." Elena leaned forward. "Did they threaten you directly?" "Not in so many words, but your father made it clear that people who caused problems for their business tended to have problems of their own." I felt a chill run down my spine. These weren't the parents who'd raised me, who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework. These were criminals who'd threatened a bank employee to keep their scheme quiet. "Sophia, are you willing to testify about what they told you?" "Yes. My grandmother deserves to get her money back, and so do all the other people they scammed." After Sophia left, Elena stayed for another hour going over what would happen the next day. Federal agents would arrest my parents early in the morning, probably at their apartment. The media would likely pick up the story because of the military angle. Veteran discovers parents' fraud scheme. I needed to be prepared for reporters trying to contact me. "Where will you be tomorrow?" Elena asked. "Here, I guess. Carmen said I can stay as long as I need to." "Good. Don't go anywhere alone and don't talk to any reporters without me present. This story is going to get a lot of attention." After Elena left, Carmen and I sat in her living room drinking tea and trying to process everything that had happened. In less than a week, I'd gone from thinking my parents had made a desperate financial decision to discovering they were running a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. "Are you okay?" Carmen asked. I don't know. Part of me feels vindicated. I wasn't crazy or delusional like they tried to claim. But part of me feels empty. These people who raised me, who I thought I knew, they're complete strangers. Grief is complicated when the people you're grieving are still alive. She was right. I was mourning the loss of my parents even though they were still breathing, still walking around in the world. The people who'd taught me right from wrong had turned out to be criminals willing to steal from their own daughter and dozens of innocent investors. That night, I barely slept. Every sound from the street made me think someone was coming to the house. Elena had said my parents might try to intimidate me into dropping the case, but I hadn't expected to feel this paranoid. I kept my phone on the nightstand with 911 pre-dialed, ready to press send if necessary. Around 3 a.m., I got up and looked out the window. A dark sedan was parked across the street from Carmen's house, its engine running. I watched for 10 minutes, but no one got out of the car. Finally, I called the police non-emergency line. There's a suspicious vehicle outside my house, I told the dispatcher. I'm involved in a federal fraud investigation, and I'm concerned about witness intimidation. A patrol car arrived 15 minutes later. The officers talked to whoever was in the sedan, then came to Carmen's door. The younger officer, who looked about my age, explained what had happened. The driver says he's a private investigator hired to conduct surveillance. He showed us a license, but he wouldn't say who hired him or what he's investigating. Is that legal? As long as he stays on public property and doesn't threaten anyone. But we'll increase patrols in this neighborhood tonight. After the police left, I sat in Carmen's kitchen drinking coffee and watching the sunrise. In a few hours, my parents would be arrested. The house I'd grown up in would be returned to me. The people who'd invested in Rivera Development Group would learn they'd been scammed. Justice was coming. But it felt nothing like I'd expected it to. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. Elena's name appeared on the screen and I answered immediately. It's happening now, she said without preamble. FBI agents are executing the search warrants. Your parents were arrested at their apartment 20 minutes ago. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake despite having slept maybe 2 hours. What happens next? They'll be processed and arraigned later today. The media is already picking up the story. Parents defraud veteran daughter is trending on local news sites. Through Carmen's bedroom window, I could see the same dark sedan. Still parked across the street, whoever was watching the house was committed to their surveillance. Elena, there's been someone watching Carmen's house all night. The police said it was a private investigator. That's Marcus Webb's doing. He's probably trying to document your daily activities, looking for anything that makes you appear unstable or unreliable. Don't give them anything to work with. By 8 a.m., Carmen's phone was ringing constantly. Reporters had somehow gotten her number and were calling for interviews. We stopped answering after the 5th call, but the ringing continued every few minutes. This is exactly what your parents wanted, Carmen said as we sat in her kitchen, avoiding the windows. They wanted to make you the story instead of their crimes. Around 9 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your parents are good people who made mistakes. Drop the charges and this can all go away quietly. I showed the message to Carmen, who immediately called Elena. Within minutes, Elena was back on the phone with Agent Morrison, reporting witness intimidation. Save that text, Elena told me. Don't respond to it, but keep it as evidence. The FBI is tracing the number now. The morning dragged on with more phone calls, more text messages, and more reporters showing up at Carmen's door. We watched the news coverage from her living room, seeing aerial shots of my childhood home with yellow police tape stretched across. The front yard. Rivera Development Group promised luxury condominiums, the reporter was saying. But investigators say the entire project was built on forged documents and stolen property. They interviewed some of the victims, retirees who'd invested their savings, young families who'd put down deposits on their dream homes. Sophia's grandmother appeared on camera, tears in her eyes as she talked about losing $80,000. I trusted them because they seemed like such a nice family, she said. They showed me pictures of their daughter in the military and said they were building something to make her proud. That hit me harder than anything else. My parents had used my military service as part of their sales pitch, telling people they were building condos to honor their veteran daughter. They'd weaponized my patriotism to steal from innocent families. Around noon, Elena called with an update from the arraignment hearing. Your parents both pleaded not guilty. Webb is claiming they're the real victims here, that they were manipulated by sophisticated con artists who used Rivera development as a front for money laundering. That's ridiculous. I saw them at the company office. I know. But Webb is good at creating reasonable doubt. He's already filed motions claiming you're an unreliable witness due to combat trauma, and that Sofia Reyes is lying to get a reward. From the FBI. Is there a reward? Not that I know of, but Webb doesn't need truth, just confusion. The afternoon brought more bad news. Someone had leaked my military records to a gossip blog, including details about incidents during my deployment that I'd never discussed with anyone except VA counselors. The blog post painted me as a damaged veteran with anger management issues and suggested my accusations against my parents were revenge fantasies. How did they get my medical records? I asked Elena. Illegally. We'll file complaints about that, too. But Jordan, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Webb is going to attack your credibility every way he can. By evening, Carmen's house was surrounded by news vans. We couldn't leave without being mobbed by reporters shouting questions about my mental health, my relationship with my parents, and whether I was doing this for money. Jordan, is it true you threatened your parents before deployment? One reporter yelled as I tried to get Carmen's mail. Did you know about your parents' financial problems? Shouted another. I retreated inside without answering, but I could see the headlines forming. Troubled veteran refuses to answer questions about parents' fraud allegations. That night, Elena came over with Agent Morrison, a tall man in his 40s, who looked like he'd seen every kind of financial crime imaginable. We've recovered most of the pre-sales money, he told us. Your parents hadn't transferred it offshore yet. But the investigation is revealing other properties, other victims going back several years. Other properties? Rivera Development Group. Was just their latest scheme. We're finding evidence of similar fraudulent sales in Austin, Houston, and Dallas. Your parents may have stolen millions of dollars over the past decade. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. My entire adult life while I was in school, while I was serving overseas, they were running scams? It appears so. We're still piecing together the timeline, but yes. Carmen spoke up from the kitchen doorway. Agent Morrison, what does this mean for Jordan's case? It strengthens it significantly. This wasn't a one-time mistake driven by financial desperation. It was a criminal enterprise that happened to target their own daughter when she was deployed and vulnerable. But even as Agent Morrison explained how strong the federal case was becoming, I could see the doubt in his eyes when he looked at me. The leaked medical records, the blog posts, the constant media coverage questioning my stability, it was all having an effect. Webb's strategy was working. Even the people trying to help me were starting to wonder if I was a reliable witness. The next morning brought a development that changed everything. Carmen woke me at dawn, her face pale and her hands shaking as she held her phone. Jordan, you need to see this. She showed me a news article that had been published online an hour earlier. The headline read, Veterans Fraud Claims Questioned After Evidence of Forged Military Records Surfaces. I read the article 3 times before the words sank in. Someone had provided documents to the media suggesting that my deployment records, the same ones Elena had used to prove I was in Afghanistan when the house was sold, had been falsified. The article quoted an unnamed military source, claiming I'd actually been discharged early due to psychological issues and had been in Texas during the time period in question. This is impossible, I said, showing the article to Carmen. I was Deployed for 15 months. I have hundreds of witnesses, photos, everything. Of course it's impossible. But look at the comments. The comment section was filled with people who'd already decided I was lying. Stolen valor, one person wrote. She's faking her service record to steal from her own parents. Another comment read, PTSD makes people delusional. She probably believes her own lies. I called Elena immediately, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I tried Agent Morrison with the same result. Finally, Elena called back around 8 a.m. I've been dealing with this all morning, she said, her voice tight with frustration. Someone with access to military databases has been creating false records. The FBI's cybercrimes unit is investigating, but the damage is already done. How is this possible? Webb has connections everywhere. Former military officers who work as private investigators, defense contractors who still have security clearances. They're not just attacking your credibility anymore, they're systematically destroying the evidence. By noon, 3 more articles had appeared online, each one raising new questions about my story. One suggested I'd been dishonorably discharged for stealing from fellow soldiers. Another claimed I'd been treated for severe paranoid delusions at a military psychiatric facility. All of it was lies, but the lies were spreading faster than any corrections could. Carmen found me sitting on her back porch, staring at my phone, and reading the increasingly vicious comments about my character, my service, my mental health. They're winning, I said quietly. Even if we prove these articles are false, people will always wonder. They'll always think there might be some truth to it. That's what they're counting on. I looked up to see Sofia Reyes standing at Carmen's back gate. She looked as exhausted as I felt, with dark circles under her eyes and her usually neat hair, pulled back in a messy ponytail. Sofia, what are you doing here? I came to warn you. Webb's people came to my house last night. They offered me $100,000 to recant my testimony, to say I made up the story about your parents threatening me. Carmen stood up from her chair. Did you call the police? Yes, but by the time they arrived, the men were gone. And this morning, I got fired from the bank. My supervisor said it was due to budget cuts, but I know better. I felt that familiar rage building in my chest, the same anger that had gotten me through firefights in Afghanistan. They're trying to silence everyone who can testify against them. It gets worse, Sofia continued. They've been contacting other victims too. The elderly couple who invested their retirement savings, someone broke into their house and stole their computer, their files, everything related to Rivera development. The single mother who put down a deposit? Her ex-husband suddenly filed for full custody of their kids, claiming she's an unfit mother for getting involved with fraudsters. The scope of what Webb and my parents were doing was staggering. This wasn't just legal defense. It was systematic intimidation of witnesses, destruction of evidence, and character assassination on a massive scale. There's something else, Sofia said, pulling out her phone. I recorded the conversation with Webb's people last night. She played the audio file. 2 male voices, calm and professional, explaining how Sofia could make her problems disappear by simply admitting she'd been mistaken about what she'd seen and heard at the bank. Miss Reyes, one voice said on the recording, your grandmother is getting older. It would be terrible if something happened to her because you chose to stick with a story that's hurting innocent people. Carmen grabbed my arm. They threatened her grandmother. The FBI needs to hear this, I said, but Sofia was already shaking her head. I tried calling Agent Morrison this morning. His supervisor said he's been reassigned to another case. Apparently, there are questions about the validity of the evidence he collected. The web of corruption was deeper than any of us had imagined. Webb wasn't just defending my parents. He was systematically dismantling the entire investigation by attacking witnesses, corrupting evidence, and apparently even influencing federal agents. My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Last chance to walk away quietly. Your parents are prepared to forgive you for this misunderstanding." I stared at the message, thinking about everything that had happened. The forged signatures, the stolen inheritance, the fake military records, the threats against witnesses. Walking away would mean my parents got away with everything. It would mean Sophia's grandmother and all the other victims would never see justice. But fighting back was destroying my reputation, my credibility, and potentially endangering everyone who'd tried to help me. For the first time since coming home from deployment, I understood what defeat felt like. That night, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of hiding from the media circus or waiting for Elena to figure out our next move, I called the one reporter who'd been covering the story most accurately, Jessica Chen from Channel 7 News. "Ms. Rivera," she answered on the first ring. "Thank you for calling me back. I want to do an interview. On camera. Tonight. Are you sure? Your lawyer advised against media appearances?" "My lawyer can't stop the lies that are being spread about me, but I can tell my own story." Jessica agreed to meet me at a neutral location, the VFW hall where I'd attended meetings after my deployment. The building was empty at night except for the security guard, who let us use the main room after I showed him my membership card. As Jessica's camera crew set up their equipment, I thought about what I wanted to say. Elena would be furious when she found out about this, but I was tired of letting other people control the narrative about my life. "We're rolling," Jessica said, settling into the chair across from me. "Jordan, let's start with the basics. Are you a combat veteran?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos I'd taken during deployment. Me in full combat gear in Afghanistan, standing next to military vehicles, with fellow soldiers whose faces I'd blurred for their privacy. These photos have metadata showing they were taken in Kandahar province between January and March of this year, the same time period when someone supposedly forged my signature in Texas. "What about the articles questioning your service record?" "They're lies. Complete fabrications. And I challenge anyone who's spreading them to provide actual evidence instead of anonymous sources and altered documents." Jessica leaned forward. "Your parents' lawyer claims you're suffering from PTSD and that your accusations are the result of combat trauma. How do you respond to that? PTSD doesn't make you hallucinate forged documents or fake corporations. It doesn't make you imagine bank records or witness testimony. Marcus Webb is using mental health stigma as a weapon against me, and that's despicable. Tell me about the night you discovered your house had been sold." I walked through the entire timeline, starting with my arrival home and ending with the discovery of Rivera Development Group. I spoke calmly, methodically, the way I'd been trained to give debriefings in the military. "Do you have any message for the people who invested in your parents' development project? I'm sorry this happened to you. You trusted people who betrayed that trust, and you deserve to get your money back. I'm fighting not just for my own inheritance, but for justice for all of us." The interview lasted 45 minutes. Jessica asked tough questions about my military service, my mental health, and my relationship with my parents. I answered everything honestly, without defensiveness or anger. When we finished, Jessica looked thoughtful. "Jordan, off the record, I've been covering this story for weeks now. The documents attacking your credibility don't pass basic fact-checking standards. Someone is working very hard to destroy your reputation. Can you prove that in your reporting?" "I'm working on it. The fake military records you mentioned? They contain errors that no actual military database would have. Wrong formatting, incorrect. Codes, inconsistent dates. Someone created them recently and planted them to discredit you." After Jessica's crew left, I sat alone in the VFW hall for a while, looking at the photos on the walls. Decades of veterans from different wars, different generations, all of them people who'd served their country and then come home to build lives. My phone buzzed with a call from Elena. "Jordan, what the hell did you just do?" "My job. I'm fighting back. I specifically told you not to talk to reporters." "Elena, they're destroying my life while we sit around filing motions and waiting for hearings. Sometimes you have to take the fight to them. There was a long pause. The interview will air tomorrow morning. We better hope it helps more than it hurts. But something had changed in me during that interview. For weeks, I'd been reactive, responding to my parents' moves, defending against Webb's attacks, trying to prove I wasn't crazy or unreliable. Tonight, I'd gone on the offensive. When I got back to Carmen's house, there was a car in the driveway I didn't recognize. Inside, I found Carmen sitting at the kitchen table with a man in his 60s wearing a VFW cap. "Jordan, this is Tom Martinez," Carmen said. "He saw the news coverage and wanted to talk to you." Tom stood up and shook my hand with the firm grip of someone who'd spent decades in construction work. "I served in Vietnam," he said, "and I invested $50,000 in your parents' condo project. When I saw them using your military service to sell their development, it made me sick. I'm sorry you lost your money. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because I've been asking around about Rivera Development Group. Your parents have been running this scam for years, but they've been careful to target people who won't cause trouble. Elderly folks, immigrants, people who don't know how to fight back." He pulled out a folder full of documents. "But they made a mistake when they targeted you. You know how to fight, and now the rest of us are going to fight with you." The interview aired at 6 a.m. the next morning, and by 7, my phone was buzzing with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. But these weren't reporters or threatening messages. They were victims of Rivera Development Group who'd seen the broadcast and wanted to share their stories. Elena arrived at Carmen's house looking both frustrated and impressed. "Your interview has been shared over 10,000 times on social media. People are calling it a veteran's fight for justice. Is that good or bad?" "Good, surprisingly. You came across as credible, composed, and angry for the right reasons. Webb's campaign to paint you as unstable is backfiring." Tom Martinez had spent the night organizing other victims into what he called the Rivera Justice Coalition. By 8 a.m., Carmen's living room was filled with 12 people who'd lost money to my parents' various schemes over the years. "They've been running different versions of this con since 2015, Tom explained, spreading documents across Carmen's coffee table. "Fake development companies, forged signatures, offshore accounts. Your case just happened to be the one that got exposed." And elderly woman named Ruth spoke up. "They took $30,000 from me in Houston 3 years ago, promised to build senior housing, then disappeared. When I tried to report it, the police said it was a civil matter." "Same story in Dallas," added a middle-aged man named Carlos. "They called their company Lone Star Properties that time. By the time we realized it was fraud, they'd moved on to Austin." Agent Morrison arrived around 9 a.m., looking like he hadn't slept in days. But there was something different about his demeanor, more focused, more determined. "I've been reassigned back to this case," he announced. "Turns out someone was feeding false information to my supervisors about the quality of our evidence. That someone has now been arrested for obstruction of justice." Elena looked up from the victim statements she'd been reviewing. "Webb's inside source?" "A former FBI agent who'd been working as a private investigator for Webb's firm. He was altering records in federal databases and had convinced my boss that our case was built on fabricated evidence." The room erupted in conversation as everyone tried to process this news. Tom raised his hand for quiet. "Agent Morrison, what does this mean for our cases?" "It means we're reopening everything. Not just Jordan's house, but every fraudulent transaction Rivera Development and their previous companies were involved in. We're looking at RICO charges now, organized criminal enterprise." I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Real, tangible hope that justice might actually be possible. "There's more," Agent Morrison continued. "Jessica Chen's reporting about the fake military records led us to the source. Webb hired a data services company to create false documents about Jordan's service. The company kept records of the work, including emails from Webb specifically requesting documents that would destroy the witness's credibility. Elena was taking notes furiously. That's witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and fraud. Webb is being arrested this afternoon. Your parents' bail is being revoked based on new evidence of witness intimidation and flight risk. After Agent Morrison left to coordinate the arrests, the victim coalition spent the afternoon sharing their stories and documenting everything they could remember about their interactions with my parents. The pattern was always the same. Identify vulnerable targets, use fake companies with legitimate-sounding names, collect money up front, then disappear when questions started being asked. They're not just thieves, Ruth said quietly. They're predators. They studied us, learned our weaknesses, and used them against us. Around 4 p.m., Elena got a call from the courthouse. Webb had been arrested without incident, but when federal agents went to arrest my parents at their apartment, they found it empty. My parents had fled? They're gone? I asked. Their neighbors say they left early this morning with several suitcases. But here's the interesting part. They left behind thousands of dollars worth of furniture and personal belongings. That suggests they left in a hurry. Agent Morrison called an hour later with an update. We've frozen all their accounts and put out a BOLO alert. They can't use credit cards, they can't access their money, and every law enforcement agency in the country is looking for them. Where do you think they went? Probably trying to get to Mexico, then on to a non-extradition country. But Jordan, they made a critical mistake. They left behind evidence we didn't even know existed. What kind of evidence? A laptop with detailed records of every scam they've run for the past 8 years. Names, amounts, bank accounts, even voice recordings of sales calls where they lied to victims. Your parents documented everything. Tom looked up from the victim statements he'd been organizing. Why would they keep records of their own crimes? Because they're not career criminals, Agent Morrison explained. They're amateurs who got greedy. They kept records because they planned to run these scams forever, and they needed to track which lies they'd told to which victims. That evening, as the victim coalition prepared to leave Carmen's house, Ruth pulled me aside. Jordan, I want you to know something. When your parents took my money 3 years ago, I gave up. I thought I was just a foolish old woman who'd been tricked. But watching you fight back, seeing you refuse to stay quiet, you've given all of us hope that maybe we can get justice too. We will get justice. All of us. Your parents underestimated you. They thought because you were quiet and respectful, you'd be easy to push around. They forgot that quiet people can be the most dangerous when they finally decide to fight back. As I watched the victim coalition leave, 12 people who'd been strangers that morning but were now united in seeking justice, I realized my parents had made their biggest mistake when they decided to target me. Not because I was stronger or smarter than their other victims, but because I had something they'd never faced before. The training and determination of a combat veteran who knew how to win a war. The manhunt for my parents ended 3 days later, at a border checkpoint in Laredo. They were trying to cross into Mexico with fake passports and $200,000 in cash hidden in their car. Agent Morrison called me with the news while I was helping Carmen prepare dinner for the victim coalition's weekly meeting. They're in federal custody, he said. And Jordan? They're ready to make a deal. The plea agreement came together quickly. My parents would serve 5 years in federal prison and pay full restitution to all victims, over $3.2 million total. Webb got 10 years for his role in the conspiracy and witness tampering. 6 months later, I stood in the front yard of 4127 Magnolia Street, holding the keys to my childhood home. The house needed work after months of being empty, but the bones were solid. Just like my grandfather always said, I decided not to live there alone. Instead, I converted it into a resource center for veterans dealing with family financial fraud. Something that happens more often than people realize. Tom Martinez became the volunteer coordinator, and Sofia Reyes left banking to work as our victim advocate. The Rivera Justice Coalition grew into a nonprofit organization that's helped recover over $8 million for fraud victims across Texas. We named it after my grandfather, the Samuel Rivera Foundation for Financial Justice. People sometimes ask if I forgive my parents. The honest answer is that I'm working on it. Forgiveness is a process, not a destination. But I know this. They tried to steal my inheritance while I was serving my country, and instead, they gave me a purpose I never expected. They thought I was too quiet, too passive to fight back. They were wrong. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe for more tales of justice, resilience, and never underestimating the quiet ones. Your support helps us share stories that matter.